Okay, for those of you who were here yesterday, there was two important things that were mentioned. One of them was repeatedly, Ethiopia is a country in transition, so as the region. The region is also in transition. Somalia, for instance, the recent elections, South Sudan was also mentioned. But the difference between those countries and Ethiopia was, I like Professor Lyon's interpretation. He says that Ethiopia transition is still deferred. I would certainly agree with that. So the question of unknown still covers or shadows Ethiopia's future. But I think what is important is to look at Ethiopia, what we know now, so we can have an understanding of what we think. Okay, let me just begin at demographics really quick. Ethiopia is the second largest country in Africa with 84 million population as of July 2012. As you can see, it has infant mortality of 75 to 1,000. The life expectancy is not much, males 53, females 59. The median age is very young country with 16, and literacy rate is very low, 42. You have a gross national income of 324. Agriculture employs 85%. As you can see, the per capita income is 1,100. And Human Development Index as of 2010 is very low. It ranks 157 out of 165. So this captures quickly about the country's demographics. Ethnicity plays a role also in Ethiopia. You have Oromos being the largest with 34%, Amaras is second, Somalis, Tigrays. They have 180 ethnic groups, but these are the largest. The breakdown of the religious breakdown is almost, some people argue with 50-50, but in this case, if you go with these numbers, you can see Orthodox with 43, Protestants 19, Muslims 33, African tradition and others. I'm really zipping through this for the sake of time, but as you know, the country lives on, it's really on the bottom, $2 per day. $2 per day. As you can see, from 60% to 80% of the people live in $2 a day, $2 a day. Therefore, they are part of, if you look at their happiness, the global happiness, Ethiopia is really unhappy, extremely unhappy. So if you think Meles Zenawi was a development or accredited, I think this will give you a second thought. Now, also one of the problematic things is development in terms of aid. It doesn't really sustain a country. A country should have a growth, not just aid that sustains itself. And here's the things, three things I picked. There's a lot of problems with Ethiopia, but these are things I see that next leadership will have to contest in order to make Ethiopia, I tend to a little bit disagree with the ambassador here that Ethiopian institutions is not as strong as it is. Still, we have to really wait and see what happens. There is unresolved history concerning the creation of Ethiopia. The leadership, there's no really exemplary leadership that can unite the country and establish peace and tolerance. And there's also geopolitical interest of the region. There's a third hand in there that, admittedly, as an American, I might even sidestep that. But there is really a clientelism and equation in the Ethiopia. The problem, Ethiopia is unique. It holds, the history of Ethiopia is unique in a sense that it has two things. It draws inspirational and also resentment. So, and as you can see, Ethiopia is only two countries. One of the two countries that's never been colonized, and that's a gray area. The rest of the map looks like this in 1913. That also, 1913, is a date modern Ethiopia was created. So you will see that the reasons Africa, the imperialists came to Africa was, of course, to gain power and national competition for colonial trade. You had also demand for raw materials and then the markets. And you have Europeans believing that they must spread Christianity and teachings to the world, which basically is imperialism. So the contention of Ethiopian history, it didn't experience this, but what they did experience is Abyssinian expansion. So therefore, you have one small entity expanding to the rest for the same reasons that colonials came to Africa. If you look at the leadership of Ethiopia, yesterday we touched some of it, but I think it's important to look at all that Ethiopia has already. Meles is the person that's credited of creating this modern Ethiopian state. He did it by contest. Basically, he said he was not going to be indifferent to what the Europeans were doing, and he expanded Ethiopia at the size it is today. So there's a resentment that has never been resolved in the contention of what Faisal Roble, my brother, calls it, the majority minority. Really, it never really had opportunity to voice, or there has never been a reconciliation like South Africa. Here is important. This is the person you don't really hear in Ethiopian history. It's skipped a lot. Iyasu. Iyasu was come from the Oromo. He's a grandson of Meles. His father was a Muslim. Michael Ali was Christianized, and when Meles died, he came to the throne because Meles didn't have any sons. He played an important role in that 3 years that he was there because he wanted to move the capital to Harar, and he had a sentimental feelings for the Muslims and the oppressed. He really wanted to free. This is also an only time in the history of Ethiopia Somalis played a role. Sayyid Muhammad Abdullah Hassan was in contact with Iyasu, and they had ongoing relationship. And at that point, I think if Iyasu would have lasted, you might have seen a resolution where we could even have a unified Horn of Africa, Somalia included. But his death is mysterious. I'll leave that to you. Here's Empress Swedi took over, and she was the first woman in the head of an internationally recognized state in Africa. She played a lot important role, and she was really, did a lot in trying to reconstruct Ethiopia, and she continued with the vision and mission of Ethiopia that her father left. Then you have Haile Selassie. Haile Selassie is the defining figure in both Ethiopian and African history. He has an important role, and he did a lot for Ethiopia, and of course he gained prominence. He was a part of created the African Union. He was respected in the League of Nations, but he was a monarch, and of course monarchy came first. And I was told a story just a few minutes ago that his daughter, when he was in 1974, when 2 million people were suffering, his daughter didn't recognize there were 2 million people in Ethiopia. She thought it was only 700,000 people that were all around in this corner. So there was the privileges that came with being I don't want to use ethnicity in Amara or Tigrayan, but there was the privileges of education, access to government resources that came with power structures that existed. Therefore, the Oromos or the Somalis or the Afars, when they contest, not because that they want to go their separate way, but because there is a historical, factual grounded that they have not been really received as a citizen of Ethiopia. Mengistu was a military man. He was the only guy who really promised the peasants that he will land ownership, he will reform land ownership, he will take land back to the people. But unfortunately, that he was a tyrant, he was a dictator, and everybody really remembers him for the Red Terror and the campaign that really a lot of the people that Dr. Lyons talked about in Washington, D.C. fled from. So he was a reason. You have a Meles Zenawi. This is a figure that really a lot of us are struggling. If you've seen the numbers, you've seen the Ethiopia and ranking in Human Development Index. You have seen that. You have a Meles Zenawi. Meles Zenawi is, I will be bluntly, because he's, I don't have even words to describe him. He is a very fortunate man that has found himself in a crucial time in the Horn of Africa, where Somalia was a mess in 20 years of self-destruction. Sudan was going through a difficult period of separation and conflict. Eritrea was, all the hopes and glorified liberation of Eritrea did not really materialize. So Meles Zenawi was the only option that the Western government had to really support whatever he came with. He perfected on how to talk to Western. He perfected about the image and the myth of development. And I'm really not a champion of human rights in my perception. I have ties to the Ogaden, so I will leave it that way. Now, how does the geopolitics play? Foreign aid is normally presented as a moral imperative, a commitment from developed nations to the less developed nations. Here's the problem. Developing nations don't need aid. They don't need handouts. They have resources. They just need the tools, education, to access their own resources. I just came back from Tanzania, and we had a lecture in the university in Dar es Salaam. And one thing that is heartbroken is there is a free flow of capitalism that is moving around in the world, directed into Africa, displacing people's land. So you have people who are now agriculturally oriented, who are doing their business and earning their living through agriculture, that has been displaced by flow of foreign capital. But we know that the use of foreign aid as a tool to advance national security, that's what it is. It is nothing beyond that. Aid means is interest. Aid is interest. Now let's look at Ethiopia. Ethiopia got $3 billion in a development aid, military aid. We have our own military training, Meles Zenawi soldiers, the military that caused so much havoc for Ethiopia. For Ethiopians are trained by our own taxpayers' money. So it's a problematic when the aid is channeled to a wrong leadership that uses that aid to really suppress their own people. Aid has issues, we know that. Even in the best times, aid creates dependency. It's unsustainable. We need growth, not sustainability through foreign aid. Corruption. It has a lack of accountability. And look at this, US government foreign aid is surprisingly confusing. You have 33 different goals. You have 570 priority areas. You have 247 activities. You have 12 departments, 24 agencies, 60 government offices handling foreign aid. And we have posters saying, stop aid to Ethiopia. It's not even coordinated. And corruption, look at what it's causing. Okay, what is the challenges and opportunities for the next leadership of Ethiopia? The minuses are returning to authoritarian rule. Understandably, yesterday we talked about the new Haile Mariam. He doesn't have the backings. He's still tied up with the old regime. Attacks on freedom of expression, association, assembly, poor human rights record, aid dependency, lack of economic diversification, unemployment. There is some democratic foundation has been laid despite Meles Zenawi. I think one of the things he done was that is the ethnic federation is something that really should be remembered, not development, but at least dismantling the old brutal that central rule. If it's the system today, if it's perfected, I think people can go exist. If you look at the economy, you have 50% of Ethiopia, it relies on export. You have employment of 70% of the population. The service sector is showing tremendous growth from 60.3 to that. Industry accounts for about 10%. So I'm looking at the, agriculture is really the main point here. Education is improving. If you look at the Ethiopian education system from Haile Selassie to now the Meles Zenawi, so it's growing. The quality of education, we don't know, but the access of education is getting better. Okay, there's two things in health that I believe that the next leadership should do. If they eliminate malaria and HIV, really those two is very important. And I think President Bush, despite a lot of not liking him, I think one thing we should credit him is he paid the highest attention to HIV, and he contributed the most amount of money going directly to that. So I think he deserves a round of applause. Okay, now Ethiopia, if we say Ethiopia, I think then we should point them a place that they can look through. They can see examples. I fell in love with Tanzania. I just came back from Tanzania, and I think, you know, when you land in an airport and you see Julius Nyerere Airport, it's exemplifies. That shows you exemplary leadership, that the people that elected him, that you know, he is a father figure, he's loved. That is the state house of the Tanzania. No soldiers, no police officer, nothing. We walked in right in there. The president was there. Would you find that in Ethiopia? I don't know. So look at Tanzania growth. Look at Tanzania growth. Look at that. The GDP. Look at that. Economic is the third largest gold producer in Africa. Small and medium firms are doing really well. I have 5 minutes, so I am just going through. And the Millennium Goal in the reduction of poverty. And how do they do it? Because they are a tolerant society. They don't care about, they have 120 ethnic groups. They have half and half Muslim, half and half Christian. And guess what? The president told us some secret that is not in the books. If you come from a large ethnic group, you will never be president of Tanzania. Only minorities, small ethnic groups are the ones that become president. And another important thing is that you learn from here is that that's really, really important, is that religion does not play a factor in a governance. But they still did it. Nyerere was Christian. Ali Munya was Muslim. They have a Kaaba was a Christian. Now they have Kikwati who's Muslim. So they are going in order, which is very exemplary that Ethiopia can follow. Regional integration is back. When I went, another thing that really made me jealous is that they talk about East African community. The Horn is a problematic. Might as well go with Middle East, as they said yesterday. That's what Ambassador Cohen said. The Ugandans, the Kenyans, and if you look at the Tanzanians, they're talking about brotherhood. They're talking about regional integration. They're talking about things that we, our Somalis, I felt embarrassed. 120 ethnic groups that live in coexisting peacefully, and we Somalis are one tribe, and we're having a problem coexisting even a day together. So what can we do? Our recommendations, I think it's ethnic regional reconciliation is overdue in Ethiopia. It must. Any new leadership that comes in has to sit down with the people. It has to eliminate this. It has to dismantle the power structure that govern Ethiopia. It has to diversify the economy. The agriculture employs 85%, and agriculture is losing value. And of course, that it will need to have a different education system. I would say improve the quality of education for all sectors, eliminate malaria, HIV, and governance, openness, dialogue, and genuine democracy. If that happens, that's the Ethiopia people want to live in. Thank you.
I feel a lot of relief because I was worried about this transition of technology. I'm honored to be here. I want to thank my colleague Hamzi and all the organizers for inviting me and giving me this opportunity. I also want to kind of refresh your memory, because this is the second time I'm being invited. I was here about 3 years ago when I spoke I spoke on unity, and at that time I spoke on unity for a reason. Unity was promoted in Ethiopia as a goal in itself, as an object, as a target. And there was a lot of discussion about this Ethiopian unity. I'm an engineer by background, and I take all probabilities equally, unless I'm convinced by data. In the Ethiopian scenario, the data that was presented by my colleague earlier, plus the data that I can go even back further, suggests that unity has not been an option, not well received, unless for part of the population. In a scenario where unity is abused over and over again, my technical background tells me, try another option. So for me, I'm not that sympathetic about unity I'm not that sympathetic about disunity either. My preference is the good of the people, whichever brings the good of the Somali people, the good for the Oromo people where I come from, and the good for all the other oppressed people. But I summarized, if you recall, the nature of Ethiopian unity. That in Ethiopia, unity is one of the most prominent political terms. If you Google search this word, Ethiopian unity, you will get about 5 million outputs. And Ethiopian unity has become a uniting ideology in itself, a purpose. In fact, quite several political organizations imply that a condition to be a member is that you accept Ethiopian unity as a package, as a donation. In fact, one can argue that unity in Ethiopia has been a natural gift, a godly stature, irrefutable. You have to take it. And that has not brought good smack to many great Oromo people and the oppressed people of the south of Ethiopia. So in my previous discussion, I argued that unity is not really that natural, neither is it a gift from God. And I briefly discussed that in Christianity, unity is derived from the Trinity, the Holy Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, which suggests that unless you are a Christian, you are not part of that unity. With all due respect to Muslims, and I have a lot of good Muslims, I read the Holy Bible, the Holy Quran equally. The Islam also says, the Holy Quran states that the mu'minan, what the believers, are united in a brotherhood, which also suggests that if you are a Muslim, you probably are not part of that unity. All I'm saying is unity, religion is not a basis for unity. And I can give nature also. In nature, sharing and unity is common, especially if there is plenty. But unity is more common as a sexual partnership, although divorce and adultery are very common. In some, unity, even with a natural peer, very dangerous. I spoke about the spider. The name of the spider is widow after the action, and after mating, the wife kills her husband, literally kills and eats. And nature has endowed the woman with a great body twice that of the male. My point again is to suggest that nature is not unanimous about unity either, to facilitate this murder. So is unity natural? Not sure. There are flocks of animals which may be forced together or prefer to be together. And there are also cross-cultural, cross-racial unity very rarely observed. In other words, you will rarely see a hyena and a lion create a unity. So, is it natural or unnatural for human beings? As individuals, we hate to be alone. In fact, solitary confinement is a legal punishment, which suggests that people prefer to be with somebody. They prefer to be united. But what, if any, are the political interests that favor Ethiopian unity? Is there anything that we can say or justifies Ethiopian unity? I have not seen any. There are many that are imposed. That is not to say I'm against unity. I'm to say that unity has to be created deliberately. I have not seen that. What is the historic rundown of unionists in Ethiopia? Other than those listed, Johannes, who ruled Ethiopia in the 18th century, ordered conversion of Muslims to Christianity in 2 weeks. Theodros, who followed him, aimed at eliminating the Oromo. Literally, that is his wording. Menelik, who was shown here, had waged war against the South throughout his life, Haile Selassie's unity was cultural domination of the Amhara. And the military inherited the unity, which never overarched the imported ideology of Marxism-Leninism. In TPLF Ethiopia, the purpose changed, the unity remained. The purpose of that unity was to make as much money as possible. It was economic. The agenda changed. So this was the Ethiopia that created or gave birth to three perceptions of unity that emerged out of Ethiopia. Three perceptions. One is the Amhara version, which calls for unity. The second one was the TPLF version, which calls for more and more money. And the third one, which calls for, that belongs to Oromo, Somali, Sidama, etc., that calls for fighting. So I suggested 3 years ago, which is very much still a hot topic, the creation of the United States of East Africa, which combines Sudan, Ethiopia, and all those countries. And to complete my suggestion, I suggested Juba as the capital city. 3 years later, what have you done with my suggestion? Nothing. So I asked the Honorable Ambassador to bless this and maybe share my suggestion with your government. Now it sounds a little benign, but impractical, but that is as practical as the Ethiopian unity is. The Amharas with this scenario will be very happy because they are for unity. They get better, more larger land. The Tigrans will be happy because they have now bigger economy. We will be very happy because we have more people to fight with or to fight for. So with this, my brief discussion this time is on leadership and conflict. And these are my focal points. In the interest of time, I will discuss this fairly briefly and connect it to the ongoing topic. I think this is our collective weakness. That is a weakness why we have all the problems in East Africa. One of the problems, not the only problem, one of the problems is lack of leadership. Meles was a very capable leader for his people. I'm not saying for Oromos or Somalis, but for his people. I followed his work. He was my classmate in college. He did an excellent job for his people. We need leaders, capable leaders, and I'll talk about that. Two schools of thought on leaders. Is a leader born or is it acquired? What have we done? And we have a lot in common, Oromos and Somalis. What does our culture do? We come from a pluralistic society where people are much more equal than the hierarchical society of the northern Ethiopia, where it favors more the rise of a leader, be it a king, an emperor, or a ras or a dejazmach. And to give a short answer, there is a man who has 11 kids. He is Mr. Tate, and these are his kids: Dick Tate, Ro Tate, Aji Tate, and goes on. And the last three, cogitate, meditate, and facilitate, are the leaders. These are the guys who deliberate, the guys who think, and people who make it happen. This is a short answer. But in a little bit further, more extended form, the leader is simply where passion, action, and need merge. You add these, the right time to these three, in the right place, he becomes a hero who inspires. And I want to give examples of passionate individuals. I don't want to go through this. You can imagine Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi, Cesar Chavez, even Adolf Hitler. I'm not talking the leader has to be positive. There can be a destructive leader. But what do these people? In fact, I'll give you some case studies of some destructive people, some naive leaders. In 1144, there were a series of wars between the Arabs and the Christians to take Jerusalem back. After hundreds of years of efforts, one boy named Shepherd, a 14-year-old boy, said Jesus gave him a letter and he has to take it to the king of France. And he started marching to the king. A 14-year-old boy took the letter from Jesus, who appeared to him as a shepherd, and he was taking it to France, and he convinced 30,000 kids to follow him. One 14-year-old kid. At the end, there were 30,000 kids who wanted to go to Jerusalem and capture Jerusalem in peace. And they were gathered in Marseille. They went all the way to Marseille, and eventually they took ships, and they wanted to march to Jerusalem to capture Jerusalem by peace. Now, I only wanted to mention how powerful one individual is. Where did he get this passion and this drive? And what are we doing with our leaders? Where do they come from? Can we motivate and cultivate leaders like that? Of course, the 30,000 were sold as slaves in North Africa. The outcome is a whole different story. Another boy, 10-year-old boy, started the same thing across the Alps. He never made it. And this is also a very interesting story. Some of you may know. 74 years before Christ, Elazar ben Yahir, when he found out that the Roman soldiers were encircling the whole population of the Jews, 900-something of them, he told his followers that it is better for all of them to commit suicide than give their hands to the Romans. He convinced 914 people, one person, and in his words, they all committed to suicide, except one woman who was hid, and she survived to tell the story. One man made such a big difference. And a bad story, but a very fascinating story for me. This happened about 10 minutes, literally, from my home. I was in San Diego. This guy, 97, he told all educated people, 39 educated people, all of them with college degrees, and almost all of them software engineers. He told them to commit suicide because there is a comet coming, and they have to jump on the comet, and their spirit will be taken to another universe. He convinced 39 people. Where did this passion to convince come from? An individual, one person can make a big difference. And of course, you might have heard about this guy who took 900 people also to Guyana and from San Francisco, and he ordered all of them to die. One person. And I could give many more. But I'll end with one more example. Genghis Khan. Little talk about him. But he ruled more territories than any person in history. Look at that. Moscow was under his territory. He was under Vienna. There is a part in Poland where I spent, where his soldiers landed. And he almost captured the whole of Europe. One man, one wise man. He's not from a royal kingdom. He rose. In Beijing, look at Beijing, encircled the city. And the city built a wall around the city. The people built the city. And when he couldn't penetrate the city, he told them to, I will leave, just bring me mice, rats, and birds. And then I will leave. The people brought birds and rats. And then he tied fire on all the rats and the birds, and he let them go. And the birds and the rats went into this fenced village, and they started burning the houses, and that's how he captured. Very creative, but one man. So my point is, we can, in the US, we can talk a lot more individuals and passionate individuals who became leaders. I don't want to talk about their traits that they should have. Can people learn these traits? Of course, yes. And I'll go to my conclusion. Leadership can be born and it can be acquired. One of our greatest weaknesses, both as Oromos and as Somalis, that I see, and that kept us under all this subjugation, is, in my opinion, at least one reason is we don't cultivate leaders. We don't motivate our leaders, political leaders. And that is a very, very important thing that I wanted to share with you. It froze. I wanted to finish with one interesting story that Americans probably are very familiar with. A very old man with his wife walked into a university, a very famous university, Harvard University, some years ago. And he wanted to meet with the president of the university. The secretary saw this man, not well-dressed, with his wife. She said, oh, no, the president has no time. And the guy sat down and he said, I have time, I'll wait for him. They waited and waited and waited. She kept telling them the president is busy, has no time. They said, we'll wait. And finally, she thought if they go in, the president comes and says, just exchange a few words, they will walk away. So she went in to the president and she asked him, these people, they won't leave. Can you just say, hi and get back? So the president came out and he shook hands and he said, what can I help you? They said, our son died here and we wanted to build a statue for him in his memory. And the person said, look, I'm sorry. If I gave permission for every man who graduated from Harvard to build a statue here, this place will turn into a cemetery. And then they said, no, we don't want to build a stone. We wanted to erect a building. And then he laughed because they were not properly dressed. He laughed and he said, do you know how much this place is? How much it costs to build these buildings? And the wife quickly said, how much? It said it's about $7 million. And the woman quickly turned around to her husband and said, that's it? And these two went to California and they created a university known as Stanford. My point is, let's seize the opportunities. Let's seize the opportunities. There are a lot of opportunities. Not necessarily, I don't know if, with all due respect, the ambassador is a very refined diplomat. From an engineer's mouth and my views, if the Ogaden problem is resolved by the Ethiopian government, I will petition a Nobel Prize for you. At the same time, you have a highly skeptical individual in me. Having grown in Abyssinian intrigues, I'm very familiar with that politics. Please spend your time wisely. Thank you.